Hey everyone, thank you for joining us this week on the Hollow Knight Marauders podcast. My name is Jamie, and I'm running solo this week actually, but I have a friend here today, author of Star Wars Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, Dr. Chris Kempshall. Thank you so much for joining me this week, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to this, particularly as for the listeners and the viewers. We should have done this like a week ago, and I couldn't
Shh,
talk.
it's okay. It's okay. A lot of delays. We're here today. AJ and Matt couldn't join me this week because they're also preoccupied and one of them is sick. So it's okay. Long time coming and super excited to chat about this book finally. So I did obtain a copy. So thank you everyone from publishing, but Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. And right before we started, I was saying how this book is absolutely gorgeous. Just look at it. Look at this thing.
It's so pretty. It's so pretty. So me and the editor at DK, David Fenterman, when we were both kind of getting started, we both had the same like image in our mind for the front cover of something exactly like that. Unfortunately, the guy who did the design for it, good Lord, they have more skill at things than I do.
It's just so cool. Like it. So when I was explaining like this book to friends, I was like, yeah, this is like a really like it's a dense book. I mean, imagine like reading a textbook, but in a good way. Like that's how I've been like. It's funny to say that's how I've been selling this to people, but that's exactly what I've been saying because like you get into it and like one thing that I absolutely love is like you have the sections with like there's like the inserts of images along the way and it's from the films and whatnot. And so it's just so cool to see. And plus it's riddled with footnotes. Oh my God. I have
Footnotes are where the joy lives.
I love the footnotes. Honestly, this is gonna sound so funny, but that is like my favorite part of this book is the fact that it is riddled with these little footnotes on the bottom of the pages. I have a few like actual questions about that, but we'll get into that later.
But the footnotes are some of my favorite bits as well. You can do odd, weird stuff in footnotes that you can't easily do in the rest of the book. So
Yeah.
I like sharing footnote joy with people.
It's so funny because it's like they're like little like Easter eggs along the way. Like it's so cool how you like take a speech or something and you're like, you know what? Let me like actually file this down here, and it's like, oh, for further reading. It's just so cool. Um, but before we like jump into like the talk about the book further, one thing I want to like ask you first, which we always ask our guests along the way, is how did like you get into Star Wars? Like, what is your Star Wars story, your personal Star Wars story?
So it's a really interesting, slightly odd one for me in that I don't remember a time when I didn't know about Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that I never got like an Empire Strikes Back, I am your father moment. It's something that I have always known. Because we recorded the Star Wars films off of UK TV
Mm-hmm.
on like a VHS, and I just used to watch
Yeah.
them endlessly.
Just
To
like
the extent
reruns of them.
I find it quite odd now if I watch them on Disney Plus or like, and there aren't advert breaks where I'm expecting them to be for like a 1980s like
Yeah.
sofa sale or something like that. So I loved the films, and I played various other games like Star Wars on on the old NES and on the Game Boy as
Yes.
well.
Oh gosh. The guys will be
Um,
drooling right now about that, but yes.
yes, and then I don't know, it must have been 1996, 1997, something around that time. I was in Florida on holiday with my parents, and we went to downtown Disney
Mhm.
in Orlando. And there used to be a massive Virgin Megastore in downtown Disney. And I went like up the many, many floors, and there was the sci-fi section, and I saw Spectre of the Past by Timothy Zahn. I was
Mhm.
like, I like Star Wars. I like playing Star Wars computer games. Maybe I'll enjoy a Star Wars book. And then just
It just
inhaled
clicked. Yeah.
the expanded universe and legends.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of what massively jump started me kind of at the end of the 1990s and into the early 2000s. And then I played a lot of a computer game called Star Wars Galaxies, which was an
Mhm.
online game, which like I mourn the fact that that game doesn't exist properly like every single day of my life.
There's still like a lot of chatter about it all the time though, so you're not
I know
alone in the morning of it at least.
quite a lot of that comes from either me, Kelly Knox, or Matt Martin.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. And then so I kind of I kind of massively immersed myself in Star Wars. And then once I finished doing like my historical PhD, First World War history back, and I moved into like geekier history. So I did some stuff on computer games and history, and then I took a jump into Star Wars and history. I wrote an academic book about Star Wars and history, and through a really ridiculous kind of confluence of circumstances involving like a random tweet from like a British archive, DK contacted me and asked me if I wanted to help them write Battles That Changed the Galaxy, and that massively saw me jump the fence from being like massive Star Wars geek fan into, and now you mean I get to play a little bit in the stuff? And yeah, kind of then all sort of kind of accelerates from there, really.
That's awesome. That's incredible. I mean, that was like one of the reasons that like we were drawn to like reaching out about this book in the first place, was the fact that you have this history as an actual historian, a real life historian, and digging into like the finer details about Star Wars itself.
Yeah, which is cool. It's weird, but it's cool.
Yeah, it's you can pull like the things that are similar, obviously, and then you can be like, all right, well, this is where it's different. One of the things that like we were super excited about as well was this is one of the first pieces of content that is set in the timeline after like Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, and it's a look back at everything so far. So one of our like burning questions is, what was it like to be the first person to be writing in the future on this timeline in Star Wars, even though it is a look back?
Yeah, it's an odd one, because this sounds I don't know if this sounds stupider than it is, but I never really thought that too much about it being the first post Episode 9 thing when I was writing it.
He's humble. It's fine.
And that was partly because I was so like the book. The blinders things were on.
Right.
But also because the way that it works when you're kind of liaising with, say, Lucasfilm or Story Group is that they provide you with the information that you need, and they don't provide you with the information that you don't need, because, there's tons of plates spinning at Lucasfilm. So there was always the possibility that like a new comic series could suddenly be announced in the post Episode 9 space when I was doing. And then I was like, well, I'm not the first. It just turned out that I was writing a piece of Episode 9 or post Episode 9 stuff, and then like a bunch of other stuff came out. And I was at Star Wars Celebration in London last year when they announced the new Daisy Ridley film. It's like, this is super exciting. It's like, there's no way that any of that information about that film is going to make its way down to me. So actually, that's quite cool. So I get to be excited about the film and when I see it in the cinema. But I was thinking back to the lead up to The Force Awakens, and there was a whole like, here's a bunch of published stuff, which is the road to The Force Awakens. And I was kind of thinking, well, maybe like literally any of that could suddenly come out, and then none of it did. And then my book came out. It's like, oh no, it turns out I am the first post Episode 9. I maybe should have spent more time thinking about that, but it was probably best that I didn't, because I reckon I'd have got quite in my head about it.
Well, hey, congratulations.
Thank you. But then I was worried that people would be like, oh my God, we're going to find out what like post Episode 9 looks like. It's like, a bit, but not but not in a way that's going to like set you up for Daisy Ridley's film. Definitely.
Like that's why like this like it is like a look back, because it is like a narrated from the character Beaumont Kin, who's Don Monaghan in the movies, right? And he's so funny. But like I love like seeing that it's like his recollection looking at the entire empire. So it is, set later in the timeline, but we are just recounting everything we've done so far. But yes, stay humble and congratulations. It is like fun.
Little snippets of stuff in there about what the post Episode 9 galaxy sort of looks like, but nothing too solid.
Yeah, just enough. I mean, that's usually how it goes. The Star Wars is always, we have what's given to us, and then we fill in the gaps along the way at way later, usually. So speaking of Beaumont Kin, even though I just like offhandedly mentioned him, he also appeared in Adam Christopher's book, Shadow of the Sith, from 2022. And I'm assuming you probably picked his brain a little bit for like Pride, but like did Beaumont Kin ever come up as well, like in these conversations? Or obviously it did about Pride, but like did you collaborate with Adam at all, like a little bit during that?
So as you say, I definitely picked his brains for Pride a bit, because Pride is an important character for
he's
Adam.
His guy too.
It's his guy, and he has a very kind of specific vision of Pride that I wanted to make sure because Pride comes up in the book. He's not like a massive ongoing character, but he's there for an important part of some of the last parts of the book, and I wanted to make sure that was, you know, working with Adam's vision of him. We did talk a bit about Beaumont Kin, but most of it was jokes about Beaumont Kin's French accent.
I was gonna say, was it the French accent?
The French accent. So like a significant amount of mine and Adam's friendship is based on like animated GIFs of people talking in French that we just kind of send to each other at semi-regular intervals. And that's like the foundation of our interaction with each other.
I love that. For context, for listeners who don't know why Beaumont Kin is a French accent, in the audiobook for Shadow of the Sith, for some reason, Beaumont Kin just has a French accent, and he does not have a French accent in the movie, but it's absolutely ridiculous. Like when I was reading Shadow for the first time, I always like read them, and then the guys listen to the audiobooks and they're like, "Hey, did you hear Beaumont Kin's French accent?" And I'm like, "What are you guys talking about?" And they like sat me down and made me listen to like a chapter, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, it's a bit much. So
it is a bit much, and it's very weird. Beyond that very funny backstory thing, I didn't really talk to Adam a huge amount about Beaumont, partly because you know, I don't want to kind of spoil things for the listeners who haven't picked up the book yet. Beaumont Kin's in quite a different place, kind of both physically and definitely emotionally, from where we see him in Shadows of the Sith. So I read Shadows of the Sith last year in kind of part preparation for this, and also it's like I just got the book signed at Celebration by Adam, so it's like, oh, now I'm going to read it. So it was useful to get a slightly more kind of light-hearted pre-war version of Beaumont Kin to help me frame kind of what I was going to do to him in the post episode 9 version.
Horrors, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know if like Beaumont Kin would consider me his best friend after we collaborated on this, but you know, he had some stuff that he needed to work through.
He definitely did. I mean, he definitely did. Well, like one thing that we always like joke around about with at Holland Marauders, whenever we rewatch Rise of Skywalker, there are so many like lines from him that are pretty much overlooked that you won't even hear unless you have the subtitles on. So like. Yes. Beaumont Kin has a lot to say, and honestly, it's all in here.
He does have lots. One of the other interesting things about kind of Beaumont Kin's voice, because I rewatched a lot of the clips, you know, the scenes that he's in, and even like, you know, the famous scene of him where he's talking about you know, secrets only the Sith knew, cloning, etc. He speaks quite often in very short sentences. Which was something that I tried to sort of adapt into his writing style, which is difficult because, you know, I don't write the way necessarily that I talk. Most people don't necessarily write the way they talk. But I tried to do a little bit of that, like, even when he has something important to say, he breaks it up a little bit to try and find his voice in through the written word.
I mean, now that you're pointing out, like I did like notice that like along the way where I was like, oh yeah, this is like a little bit like shorter, but like more. I did notice that, so that's really cool.
I'm firstly I'm delighted that it came across and not just like why is every sentence like 4 words long, Chris? You can like, spread some of this out.
That's like kind of how my thoughts work as well. So I didn't really like think twice about it, and so like actually reading it, I was like, oh, this is like making a lot of sense to me. Like I was like breezing through this book, and so I was like. So now that you pointed out, I'm like, oh, geez, it's me.
You and Beaumont Kin are very, very, very similar in that sense.
We like are like, okay, total aside, I would love to be like a galactic historian. Like that just sounds like such a cool job. Like actually like being there and like just like living it up like with the resistance, and you're like, you know what? I'm just gonna stay back and just keep the records and write down every single thing that you guys did. And just don't talk to me. Like that would be like really ideal.
Are you not joining us on the front lines, Beaumont? No, I'm just going to make some notes. Just got some thoughts that I need to. If some of you could come back alive so I can talk to you afterwards, that would help a lot. But you know,
please, I would like to interview you later. But that's it. I totally understand. let's switch gears a little bit. So something I have like written down. So people usually like ask like us marauders why we like enjoy canon so much in the whole legends versus canon debate. And like this book pretty much like sums it up because it sees like a history of Star Wars as like on a timeline, and like each thing influences the next. So like as a historian, like I assume this was something that you also enjoy from Star Wars, where you're like being able to create this history book and picking things like from the timeline of like what is important for galactic history.
Yeah, 100%. So there's kind of two aspects to that. The first thing is, if we kind of consider me as a historian, not just me as a geek, they're two sides of the same coin.
Similar but different.
Yeah, and in fact, that coin has only one side. But if me and three of my historian colleagues were to look at the same event and say, somebody said, write a book for us, we'd all draw out different things of an event that, or period of time that we think are super important, and then our books would be an argument as why we think those are super important. So that transfers really nicely onto Star Wars, because one of the things that we all know about Star Wars, but we don't necessarily properly think about Star Wars, is that everything in Star Wars happened in the past. It tells us that in the very first things that appear at the beginning of every single Star Wars is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, which means that everything is past and everything is history. So you could get one of Beaumont Kin's colleagues to write their version of the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire, and they might pull out slightly different things that they think are super important. And Beaumont tries to kind of explain a little bit about that, I think, at the beginning of the book, that this is very much his personal argument and his personal analysis. Other people may disagree, other people may write different things at some point, and actually that's fine, because he's drawing, there's a lot of past, there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the past in our world and in the Star Wars world. It can't all make it into a historical book,
right? Of course.
And there's also kind of the different level of what even would make it into the future for Beaumont Kin to draw upon, in the same way what's made it into the future for me to draw upon if I'm writing a history book. And that's quite a fun, interesting challenge as well, that of trying to decide what is going to make it to Beaumont Kin and what is not going to make it to Beaumont Kin as he kind of draws across this whole timeline.
Yeah, and like obviously like a lot of that always goes back to record keeping and what actually like survives it all the way to the end there, because like obviously we have like in Rogue One all of like the Empire's like records and whatnot get destroyed, or a lot of them do, and so who knows how much we actually like lost along the way.
100%.
As in real life.
In real life. And also, that you get things in like the comics and they're like, oh, Darth Vader had a conversation with the Emperor. It's like, no one's recording that. No one is recording this stuff. So Beaumont can't use it because there's no pathway for that material to get to him.
Yeah, and there's only you can't really say. We can assume, because that's not really good research. We can't assume that. No. So
you can draw conclusions based off of the available evidence, but you can't just kind of Beaumont Kin can't make stuff up. And he's aware of the danger of just making stuff up.
Yeah. To go off of that, I mentioned it before we started, but one of my favorite parts is the fact that this book is riddled with footnotes and those in-universe original resources. So just jumping off directly, how did this come about in like the planning? Like how did you decide how to make specific moments an in-universe book, or a speech that a droid recorded, or a file from some hyper-specific archive, or something else? Like how did that all come about?
So one of the big initial kind of ongoing conversations between me, DK, and Lucasfilm Story Group was about the idea of, how does Beaumont Kin know the things that Beaumont Kin knows? Given that we've identified the person writing this book, it's not some kind of omniscient narrator. That causes us both a kind of a problem and an opportunity. We have to figure out how Beaumont Kin knows the things that he knows. Because I know more than Beaumont Kin knows, because I've cheated and watched Star Wars.
I've seen all of it.
Which, is unfortunate that Beaumont Kin doesn't have the opportunity to sit down and do that, but, them's the breaks. And for a while, we kind of played around with dropping bits into the text of after Luke Skywalker confronted the Emperor, he told people afterwards, and it sort of worked, but it was too
So that's just,
anecdotal.
and it's super reliable on like Luke's memories, and it's like, okay,
Yes,
well, we believe you, but
but yeah,
but
people tell a lot of stories.
yeah,
You're Luke Skywalker, but you're also still human, and that's a thing for us. So I eventually I basically sent an email to David Fenterman, the editor at DK, said, I think, honestly, and this isn't just because I'm a historian and, old habits die hard, we should just start putting footnotes in this thing. Because it solves our problem for us. And also, I reckon the audience will get a kick out of it because it makes it feel like a history book. So I came up with like a list of like a couple of example styles of referencing that I was going to do. And then I changed my mind like halfway through like a set of 4 chapters, and then kind of had to go back and change the rules. But then I had like a long Word document of all the footnotes in every single chapter, just so I could kind of cross-reference. If I was drawing
yeah,
something again, I wasn't calling it something slightly different or the like, so that it was there. So that solved the, okay, how do we reference material question, but also it doesn't solve that how does material make it to Beaumont Kin. So things like, the Empire has always struck me as, and particularly having watched Andor, as an organization that loves paperwork.
yes,
So it produces bureaucracy. And even in A New Hope, when Tarkin arrives and goes, the Emperor has shut down the Senate. Like, I think it's Taj's first response is how we maintain the bureaucracy. So there's a suggestion that there's a lot of, red ink going on in the background, which meant that you can play around with like the idea that the Empire produces reports that no one's reading this stuff, but
yeah.
they
It's just someone just churning them out, and they're
just
who knows
churning them
where they're
out.
going. Yeah,
Yeah, the Empire breathes in bureaucracy, and you then get moments like, how do we then think about the Rebel Alliance? So, that conference in Rogue One where Jyn Erso is like, we have to go and blow up the Death Star. Rebellions are founded on hope. So, well, that feels like the type of thing that would be recorded within the Rebel Alliance. They're fighting this war with the expectation that they're going to win at some point.
yeah.
Otherwise, or the hope that they're going to win. Otherwise, what's the point? So they're gonna produce their own memory of the Rebel Alliance. So that kind of solved those 2 bits. But there's also stuff like, I said, conversations between the Emperor and Darth Vader are never going to make it to Beaumont Kin. But what about conversations between, say, Princess Leia and Darth Vader that happen in A New Hope, where she kind of marches up to Darth Vader and is like, I should have known it was you. You're the only person who would be this aggressive and do that thing. It's like, that feels like something I want to put in the book, but we need to figure out how that little story can make its way to Beaumont Kin. And occasionally we got quite creative with the ways that some of those would make it across. And then the other aspect of the footnotes is occasionally Beaumont gets a little snarky or sarcastic in the footnotes. And I quite like that little aspect of him, that sometimes he'll be quite dismissive of something, or like, this, I read this thing and it was dreadful. Or
Yeah,
that
yeah,
little aspect of a
exactly.
little Beaumont's asides can be quite funny in a book that is not necessarily very funny.
Yeah, it added like just like another like element to this where it was totally unexpected for like me, and like something that like I loved was like picking out like references like specifically of like this is the moment in which that exactly happened. So it's like, oh, like this was a recorded speech on Ferrex about like a funeral, and it's like, oh my god, that is like the final scene of season 1 of
Yeah,
Andor, excuse me. And then to switch gears fully, like it's like, oh, there's this log about the Spectre's crew on Ghost crew on Lothal, and it's like all everything about like rebels, and it's like there it is, and it's just like each of these like references like made it like in and so like you said you had like a Word document along the way just making sure the same things were being used. Did you also just have like a record keeping of like what these like databases were? Because there's some that's just like, oh, this was pulled from the Hollow archives on like a highly specific planet. Like did you like make these like little um archives like as well, so that way like technically like, oh, these are all the film ones, these are all the book ones? Was there a breakdown like that kind of?
Not entirely. There was times that it was like, okay, I want to feature an archive on this planet, either because it's a planet I like, or I
Mhm.
like the idea of this material being spread out. Because I think a little bit in the introduction, Beaumont's like, God, this was hard work trying to get hold of
Yeah.
all of this stuff while I'm stuck where I am stuck. And I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for like a bunch of people on the internet, basically, who gave me access to
Yeah.
these things. So I wanted to spread some of this stuff around, and kind of keep a log of where I was, so that, with things like, Rebels is a TV show that I really really liked, and it
Mhm.
feels quite an important period of time. So it's the type of thing I know I'm going to go back to Lothal at various points, but I wanted to at times show that there's a difference between like the Imperial archive that relates to Lothal and then the archive that the people of Lothal set up afterwards. And there's a
Right,
slightly
yeah.
different kind of naming structure that suggests that how they are trying to now record their history or reconcile their history with the things that the Empire did to them,
Right.
as a symbol of their own liberation. So there was like little moments like that I wanted to show that, the Empire and the Rebel Alliance aren't the only show in town when it comes to recording this stuff. Each planet, each group of people has their own vested interest in their own past, and it's important to them. And
Mhm.
because it
Yeah.
feels like it should be important to them, it should be important to me to show it's important to them.
Yeah. This is just so good to like hear all of this, because like that is it exactly, because obviously everyone has like different recollections of history, and then like a local group will clearly always have something different. It just makes me think in the Bad Batch season 2 and 3, when they go to Pabu on the islands, they have like that archive there, and like that is a Fee's like pride and joy of just like bringing in like things that the Empire has destroyed, and just
Yeah,
I just love it so much.
because it matters, because it's
Yeah,
important, and the very act of saving something, they're saving it for themselves, but they're also saving it for a future generation. And the very act of
exactly.
doing that is there will be a future generation.
Yes.
That future generation doesn't exist if the Empire wins. So that for that future generation to exist, we have to win, and therefore it becomes an act of rebellion and resistance itself.
Exactly. Yes, of course. Oh my gosh. Um, was there anything in like recent Star Wars in the past couple of years that popped up and you're like, oh my gosh, this needs to be in my book? And was there any type of moment like that recently that came up?
So because I cast quite a like I was we cast a super broad net, and a lot of the heavy lifting for some of that came from Story Group,
Yeah.
and put kind of perpetually grateful to them. I mean, the obvious answer is the entirety of Andor.
Yes.
As I sat there and kind of watched this and ate it up, in the lead
Oh
up to
my
starting the
god.
book. So
Yeah.
I'm basically writing out the entirety of the script as people are saying it, and the like. But there was stuff that people might not necessarily have thought would be super important, and it that didn't even necessarily make itself way into the book in a reproduction one for one kind of aspect. But to give you an example, so in Obi-Wan, when Obi-Wan and Leia are on, I can't remember which planet it's on, but they get picked up by this kind of alien mole man,
Yeah, oh,
who
Freck. Oh my
then
gosh. That
hands
guy.
them into the Imperials, and he's got like a
Yep.
little Imperial flag in the back.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time thinking about that as a really interesting insight to how
Yeah.
people who you wouldn't necessarily think should be interacting with the Empire were interacting with the Empire, and that provoked a lot of thought and in the end a lot of content for the
Mm.
book, as a little snapshot, as a window, because then you start, okay, so if we start extrapolating this out, Frick stands as a little example. That's a tiny single individual case study, which is
Mhm.
not necessarily representative of anything. But he's not acting like this is unusual, and the Imperials aren't acting as if this isn't unusual. So what does that mean for how we should actually consider the way that non-humans are interacting with the Empire, or how anybody is interacting with the Empire? If we then start to scale that up, I spent a lot of time thinking about that moment
Mm.
in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Not necessarily as long as I spent thinking about like the entirety of Andor, but
Yeah.
that was the type of a thing that I found interesting, like a really unusual little
Yeah.
aside
It
of
is that little moment is, like, super bizarre in Kenobi because, like, he is an alien interacting with the Empire so closely, and that's something we
yes,
rarely see, and so,
no.
yeah, that's a really good pull.
I just sat there for a little while, and it was like a
Yeah.
I I need to think some more about this, and that's one of the joys of working with some of this kind of Star Wars material, in that you don't necessarily draw inspiration from the places people think you might draw
Mhm.
inspiration. So, I loved like the Dr. Aphra novel, graphic novels, and there's bits and pieces that
Yes.
I draw from that. But anything Star Wars related can be a moment under the right circumstances, depending on what it is that you're working on, which is why we're so much the better for like taking the totality of Star Wars as a collective to then think about.
Yeah, and, like, this work really shows how, like, deep we can, like, think about Star Wars in, like, the broader timeline because, like, we always are like, "Oh, yeah, it's just we know that this event happened," but, like, this does dive a little bit more into the why and, like, thinking about, like, as you said, like, why, like, a normal person in this galaxy would be a part of it, and to quote
Yeah, and
Andor,
just
"Are you part of
hand
it?"
over two strangers who appear to be nice, appear to be a father and his daughter,
Mhm.
and the first thought you'd have is they seem a bit suspicious. I'll hand them to the stormtroopers.
Yeah, like, "What? Okay."
Yeah,
Um
you're not a friendly mole man at all.
I was not expecting Freck to get mentioned during this. This is just too funny. And another reason Matt is gonna be upset he didn't get to join in this week. He loves all the aliens. Let me switch a little bit further. So one thing that this is a totally kind of really specific moment, but I loved you pulling something about the music scene in Star Wars, and it was something that was pulled out of a Legends guidebook. And so like there was so much in this book that had us searching for what is that because it's from Legends and like our personal like knowledge is not as expansive as everyone else's or whoever. But what were some moments that you pulled from Legends that you were really happy that made it in?
So there's like a bunch of little stuff. Some of that music stuff was fun to put in,
Yeah.
and um, particularly kind of drawing from like some of the source books and the like. There's various cool things in that. So Pollux Hax is a character who comes up, who was in one of the really really old source books, and he's just an absolute scumbag. I hate him. And everything
Gotta
that
put
he
him in.
barely stands for. So he's got to go in. He's got to go in the book. So little characters like that. But there's fun things in that kind of that mean more to me necessarily than anybody else. So I really loved the old X-Wing TIE Fighter games, and
Mhm.
X-Wing Alliance is a game that I really really loved. There's a little passing reference to X-Wing Alliance in the book. I think it's here just tucked away in one of the footnotes. That doesn't change anything. It doesn't. And if you haven't played X-Wing Alliance, you don't lose out from not knowing it, but you get a little something that if you have
Yeah.
played X-Wing Alliance and you spot the reference, which I thought was a cool thing. But there's an event that I've always found really really interesting, and it goes all the way back to the Empire Strikes Back radio drama,
Ooh.
which is the ambush of the rebel convoy at Dera 4 that got it gets mentioned at various points in some of the Legends novels, and then it got depicted in the old X-Wing Rogue Squadron graphic novels by Michael A. Stackpole, and that was something I was quite keen to put in the book.
Mhm.
It randomly got brought up, not by me, by one of my co-authors in Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which gave me the cover to expand it a little bit more, because it wasn't me reintroducing it. It was already partially mentioned in the book. I just got to to pad it out a little bit. But it happens in a really specific way in the old Legends graphics novels, with some very very important recognizable characters are there, and it's not possible to do that again with the same characters, because the new
Yeah. Yep, everything
they've
changes.
changed. But that gave me the opportunity to kind of redo the ambush at Dera 4 in a way that is actually not that dissimilar to how it appeared in the old Legends graphic novels. So again, the way you read it now makes perfect sense in the moment that it appears. But if you have seen the old Rogue Squadron graphic novels, there's a similarity bridge between it, which I like that it's there. It's such like a dumb geeky little thing
Fun
that
little
kind
reference.
of that kind of was basically me kind of trying to headcanon it into each other, and I think it quite works now. So there's loads of little stuff in there that are more almost in there for my benefit rather than anybody else's. But I know that people like this stuff, and it's like, well, I can put it in, and I can almost do it in a way that's like an echo.
I always love to see it. Like, it's always fun to see like the different authors' personal, like, this is something that I absolutely love, and just like lightly shoving it gently like into it, and like it's always fun to like see that they come out, and like that's why I always ask, because I'm like, I know that there's like definitely some reference in here. I have no idea what it is, but now I'm just like, oh, an ambushed. Anytime the radio dramas get mentioned as well, I'm just like, all right, I need to like dig deeper and like fully listen to these things.
It's the similar type of thing that I think motivates Cavan Scott with Jackson.
I was just gonna say that, but
a desire to make it happen.
I genuinely was actually going to say it's like Cavan Scott and Jackson, but like I didn't want to. I didn't be the one to say it, but we both said it.
and you know, Cavan Scott has a deep, enduring love of Jackson, and he's far more committed to it than necessarily I am to Dara 4. But
this is good.
It's just nice to be in the same wheelhouse.
Yeah, dip it and toe into it, and actually be like, all right, here's something that I really enjoy, and I just love to see it. Okay, I'm gonna end with possibly one more here, if we have the time. So
yeah,
I think
I'm not going anywhere.
All right, perfect. Okay. Yeah, because we kind of like alluded into that. So I think that my final question here really is, what was the most challenging section of history of the Empire that you covered in this?
Ooh.
Because it spans everything from like the beginning pre-Clone War into the thick of it, and then into the remnants, and then into everything in the future. So
so I'm tempted to give two answers.
Sure.
So the first one is, and I'm aware that this sounds odd when I say it, and I'll try and kind of deconstruct it a little bit, is that one of the things that we faced really at the outset of writing this book is that the vast majority of the information that we know about the Empire, we don't actually know at all. It's all kind of based on an assumption of, well, sure, this is probably the type of thing that the Empire would do. You know, of course, they're probably indoctrinating children. That feels like the type of thing that the Empire would do. But it's never actually, a lot of this stuff has never actually been shown anywhere. It's never actually been portrayed either on screen or on the page or in radio dramas and stuff like that. So with a lot of the material particularly in those first two sections of the book, we kind of had to build it from the ground up based on the shared assumptions that we all had of the Empire, and construct something that fit in those assumptions, but that actually made it real. You know, we've never actually seen how the Empire's tax system worked. And whilst, you know, we don't go into a ton of detail, like here's the various forms and the tax numbers, we did have to build a bit of that from the ground up to create something that felt solid and foundational. They didn't contradict the wider whole, and that left enough room for kind of variation from, I don't know, planet to planet or system to system or moment to moment. So that was quite challenging to go, okay, you know, in this section, we're going to write about Imperial Society. We've seen bits of Imperial Society in Rebels and in the graphic novels and but they're tiny little snapshots. What does this actually look like across a galactic empire? And trying to build something that was flexible enough to fit in most situations, and not solid enough that if somebody wanted to come along and do something different, they weren't handcuffed to the book that stupid British historian wrote 5 years ago. That, you know, there was a bit of flexibility and freedom for people. And that was a challenge of, oh, actually none of this exists. So I guess this week I'm inventing an education system for the Empire, and then
Just casually.
just casually, and then we'll see how it works when it goes kind of through a few drafts and like so. From a creative point of view, it was a really fun challenge, but there were moments when in conversation between me and David at DK, it was like, this is actually more complicated than we thought it would be, because before we can actually start writing any words, we need to solve some quite significant conceptual problems.
Definitely.
The other half of that question is, there's, the Galactic Empire isn't fun. It's not a fun institution and organization, and the second section of the book gets quite dark and uncomfortable in some places, and that was a different kind of challenge of finding a way to convey that through Beaumont Kin, through the page to the reader, of if we're going to treat the Galactic Empire seriously and we're going to treat this like it's real, then we actually do have to treat this like it's real. So what would this feel like as Beaumont Kin doing this research, doing this examination? What would it feel like to read, for him to read it in an archive, to then dwell on it and then try and write it? And then what's the feeling we want to convey to the reader in this? That, everybody's here because, wow, this is like an in-universe history book. But if this is an in-universe history book, then it has to be an in-universe history book. And some of it you might
there
not
are some parts that
read.
It was a little difficult to stomach along the way when you actually do think about it deeper. As a reader, there were some parts where I gradually tabbed along the way. Just gradually. A lot of it is just the random footnotes that I found funny, but there was some sections where I was I can't tab any of this, because it was rough, and it's this at the end of the day you look back at it, it's this is the Empire, and man, they really were the ultimate bad guys in a sense.
And that's what they have to be. When I used to play Star Wars Galaxies, I played as the Empire. I've got an Imperial officer's cap that is 9/10 of my personality. As part of writing the book, I've got a little bust of Emperor Palpatine on my desk.
He's watching
you. Just watching me as what more do you have to tell me? So I understand the out of universe appeal of playing as the Empire. But you have to kind of leave a lot of that behind to do the in-universe version, because you do actually have to look at it and really properly look at it as go, well, this is the reality of what this thing must have been.
It was portrayed that way, definitely, and it does make you think. And like I said, it is a textbook, but not at the same time, because it's just so much more than that. And I honestly cannot thank you enough for getting this together, because this is probably one of the coolest Star Wars books that I've read in the last handful of years. So
thank you.
It's true. Of course.
It's the book that I always kind of wanted to write. And then when I got signed up to Battles That Changed the Galaxy, and there was a little voice in the back of my head was are you waiting for anything in particular, Chris? Do you think there's a better chance it's going to come down the road in the next 5 years? Or maybe just mention this as an idea to David at DK, and then see how it pans out. And I'm delighted that it exists.
I'm glad you took that leap. I'm glad you were why not? Let me just ask. I'm glad you took that leap. This is so cool. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, and thank you for
having me along. I've been super looking forward to it, and I'll happily keep talking about that book for the rest of my life.
Please, we expect a revision eventually. No, I'm kidding. You don't need to do that.
I'm not sure Beaumont Kin's ready for it yet. I reckon he needs to take a holiday.
Seriously. Oh my god, he does. Well, yes, thank you so much. Thank you to DK for sending this as well to us. And wow, for my listeners, for Holland Marauders, please go read this. Take it day by day, because it is totally worth it for an analysis of the Empire. If you like history at all, even though that's kind of weird to say, because I actually read history books, but if you like history at all, you'll enjoy it. But thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much to everyone who has been tuning in with listening to us today. We're Holland Marauders. We're a our podcast is available everywhere the major podcast platforms are listed. This video is also available on YouTube. Obviously, if you've been watching it, hello. But if you've been listening, we're available on YouTube, and we'll catch you guys next time on the HoloNet Routers podcast. Thank you so much for listening.